What's going on, guys? It is MurderInc here, back with another Raid Shadow Legends video, and today we're going to be taking a rather exciting trip back in time to the start of Raid Shadow Legends. Some players are still around who are able to experience it, and thankfully for me and for you guys who are watching this, I was a hardcore World of Warcraft player before I started playing Raid, so I got into this very addictive habit of taking screenshots all the time. Now, this usually happens when I get really involved into a game, so I can kind of capture those moments and remember them and reflect on them. And I recently just looked at my Raid Shadow Legends pictures, and I'm really excited to show all of those shots with you guys, because if you haven't been around since the start of this game, you're going to be pretty much mind blown as to how different the game was back then to when it is now. And if you were around back then, I've already shared this with quite a few clanmates that I've been playing for around 2 years, if not longer, and they were mind blown at some of the things that I saved. So I'm really excited to share all of that with you guys here today. So here we have it, starting off from the first picture. As we can see, it's from May 23rd, 2019 at midnight my time. And one thing to note, I did mention that usually once I get more active into a game, that's when I start, and you're gonna quickly see the issues of addiction that I do have with this game. Many accounts, some of them I don't even know where they are anymore, but that's a whole other story. So this is going to be the start of my second account. My first account I did start in December of 2018. Wasn't as into the game. I played here and there while I was playing World of Warcraft, and this is really when I kind of put World of Warcraft aside and really focused on the game. As you can see here, Aether was the best starter, hands down, when you were starting the game, when it first came out, because she brought so much to the table. On top of that, there was this champion called Executioner who was absolutely busted. Some of you might have heard of him. If you played back then, you definitely know what I'm talking about. They did have to nerf him, but he could pretty much solo the entire campaign by himself with literally no gear at all. That's how good he was. So regardless of that, Juliana, notoriously known as one of the best progression champions in the game at that time. Aether as well as far as poison goes. Tyrell, everyone knows how good Tyrell is. And finally, the one, the only Apothecary. Moving into the next picture, you can kind of see the start of my second account here. First legendary I pulled was by Stilphus, second Turvold, which is pretty much why I consider Turvold one of my favorite champions. I had him from so early on and I've been using him forever. So this is pretty much the status of my account about, I want to say, a little bit less than 2 weeks into starting the second account here. So I did like to buy stuff, as you guys already know. Moving on to the next one. Here's a first glimpse at my Battle Khazar. It was a recent pull after that. I do have a Skull Crusher, who was very strong at the time as well. So really quickly looking at his stats, it's kind of funny to look back. 6-star gear wasn't in the game yet, it was just 5-star gear. So we can kind of see 240 accuracy, pretty decent speed, I'm pretty impressed there. Defense, terrible, I did a terrible job on that. In health, it's kind of funny how the health wasn't separated back then. It was just one big number. I'm pretty sure they separated now, I could be wrong on that. Moving on to the next picture, we have my first Skull Crusher build ever. Now, I can honestly say that I have zero idea why he's this fast. If I had to guess, I would say he's not booked, or he's taking the stun each time, which is why I had to have him extremely fast, so once he got stunned from the clan boss, he could wrap around, repeat his turns, and still be able to provide counterattack when he needed to. Outside of that pretty basic build, this guy's literally falling over when it comes to any difficult content. Even my gear isn't fully upgraded here. Now my Septimus here, and this is where things get a little bit spicy. I'm a huge advocate in crit capping, and when I saw this, it hurt my soul to no end. 79% crit chance. This only works with Battle. This literally only works with Battle. On top of that, 133 speed. What was I thinking? I don't know, but I'm glad I've moved past these days and I'm going on to making guides for people so they never make these mistakes that I made when I first started playing here. Moving on to this, we have Dragon 15, kind of my first progress here, 50 seconds. As you can see, when you pull good champions, you can ramp up rather quickly in this game. This is my first, I guess, campaign farming champion. Once again, really hard to see, not even 100% crit rate, so the consistency wasn't quite there. Surprisingly enough, even back then, I had a decent idea about the attack to crit damage ratio, which is nice. His accuracy definitely wasn't anything to look at there. So this is a pretty bad build once again. But like I said, you'll have to start somewhere. So as we can kind of see from the gear I showed you, this what kind of culminates everything together in making my first Nightmare team. And for those of you who don't know, Ultra Nightmare was not initially into the game, that was released much later. I actually do have pictures leading up to the release and what the teams looked like when it first came out and how difficult that really was. So as you can see, I was indeed using Bad Elves, so maybe small props to me there for using Septimus there to really push out my damage. I'm sure at this point in time, I was proud of my 21.38 million damage dealt. And of course, Steel Skull being the awesome poisoner that I did have at the time for the defense up as well to make all of this possible. This was my Steel Skull build, rather quick, low accuracy, this is fine. Defense, it's hard to imagine that this even did 20 million damage in Nightmare difficulty, but it is what it is. As we can see from the date now, we were about just under 2 months away from when I first started taking these screenshots. Skull Crusher, Reflex gear, you love to see it. I had no idea Reflex worked the way it did today. However, I just felt like using it back then. If I had known, I'm sure this would have changed so much for the game after we found how cool it is to use Reflex and a 4-turn cooldown, being as consistent as it currently is. Here's a rather questionable Septimus build. I'm not really sure what I was going for here. He isn't crit capped. This does look like a clan boss build, building as much survivability as possible, but still, if you're watching this, never build a champion like this. Please, I beg you. One cool thing to notice is the plarium play launcher was not even out yet. This was strictly a mobile game, and this kind of goes to show you why I started so late into taking screenshots for this second account here. My first Ice Golem Stage 20 team. Battle Khazar, Blind Seer, Royal Guard, Tayrail, and finally Biggin. The time's pretty bad, not gonna lie, 3 minutes and 40 seconds, but it is what it is. Moving on, we did get a little bit of progress, 22.06 million damage here with the Battle and Blind Seer. I always love testing out new champions, which is why I started new accounts so frequently, so I can get some good deals on packs and keep opening shards. Those of you who don't know, packs were very hard to come by back in the day. They weren't spammed as often as now, so the amount of shards you can buy today is way different than what you could have bought back then. Now this is a really cool picture. This is me fighting one of my friends, Furion. This is even before I was in Gods and Legends together. So Lord Shazar was 1000% the meta back then. And some people may know this, some people may not know this, but if you had him, you were considered all set for Arena. He was so good. This is the team I used, Shazar, Biggin, Ray, and Seeker here. This was definitely a lot of fun. Also back when level 60 was indeed the cap, when I was a filthy whale buying that raid card. Moving on to the next picture, this one really hit home for me. If you guys have watched me on Twitch before, you know that I spent $1,300 trying to pull this champion on my first account, which is the account that I play to this day. And this is the second account, and I got him, as we can see here, over 2 years ago, based on today's date and the date on the bottom of the screen. So over 2 years ago, I pulled this. Had I kept this account, I mean, that stream was a lot of fun, so it wouldn't have been as good of a stream. And honestly, it was a rather memorable moment, despite an expensive one. But this champion was indeed pulled, so I did get to have a lot of fun using this champion back then. Moving on to the next picture, slowly ramping up with that long beard now, trying to get as much damage as possible, but definitely a lot of fun. Helped out Steel Skull for sure, and now the infamous Foli fusion. Now for those of you who weren't playing back then, I really want you to take some time to look at this here. This was the most questionable fusion in the history of Raid Shadow Legends. But there's more to it than just that. Because of this fusion, we got the permanent fusion Razin. That was kind of a I'm sorry gift from Plarium. So if this never happened in history, you would not have Razin. Razin was never intended and put into this game here for a specific reason. It was simply due to the huge backlash from Foli. As we can see, Towering Titan, I believe, is the guy on the left there, the Void. He was under the biggest paywall you could have ever possibly seen for a fusion. And on top of that, he was the last event of the fusion. Back before you could pre-plan for things, we didn't have a really good calendar system back then, so we were all waiting for this event, and you could have worked really hard fusing the first 3 champions. It's actually really cool to see Kitus in here, because we all know how strong Kitus is. But to spend so much time on 3 champions, then to be hit with this last champion here, and have to spend money unless you've been saving for literal months before that, and the game hadn't even been out for more than 8 months total since the closed beta released. So if you've been saving since Sir Nicholas, Fusion, all of that good stuff, you probably could have gotten this champion and got this done. If you didn't, you were forced to spend money on Foli, who was a very, very strong champion with that block revive back then. So this is definitely one of those moments that will be in the raid history forever. And if you didn't know this before, now you do. And it's really cool to be able to reflect back to a point in time like this. Moving on, we have my first Cold Heart build. Now, the real question is, what the hell was I thinking? We have 60% crit rate, so listen, old MurderInc, if you didn't know, you need 70% crit rate, unless you're using Bad O. Let's just assume, for my sanity, that I was using Bad O, because if not, this is extremely embarrassing. She is level 1, so I can't really look at her HP or defense or attack. Speed's okay, but accuracy, I don't even know what's going on here. This is Ignatius here, really strong champion. Everyone knows he's a strong champion. Not really sure why I built any accuracy, maybe for the AoE provoke, but that's not really what he's good on. And you can kind of see the common trend with lifesteal gear everywhere. And now finally with 6-star gear on the table. So Spider's Den stage 20 here. We have Ignatius, Double Cold Heart, Royal Guard, Tyrell. Not really sure how I made this work with the incredibly low stats that I was working with, but hey, it is what it is. I'm not complaining and I'll never go back. Tyrell was actually extremely popular for Spider Stage 20 because of that 8-3 that he has that reduces turn meter, so I'm assuming that's what I was using instead of Cold Heart's Heartseeker. Because don't forget, there was no customizable AI, so I couldn't just Heartseeker with the preset AI, which was extremely annoying. Also, this doesn't even make sense of a team, because I'm using an AoE damage dealer and Ignatius, and as we all know, Ignatius requires the spiderlings to be alive and do damage. So thank God my raid knowledge expanded thoroughly since this incident here. Alright, so now we're ramping. You can kind of see the progression of this second account here. Quite a few more legendaries. We already have some dupes on the table, which we all know about dupes. Coming soon to a device near you. We've been waiting for it since then, and like I said, this was over 2 years ago now, but this was the current state of my account after the first screenshot, where I had barely any champions, just pulled a bunch of shards and got a few legendaries there, so we were progressing quite quickly for sure. This was my first Foli build, rather quick, not crit capped. I'm assuming I used him for Clan Boss since it is in Lifesteal Gear. Clan Boss was hands down the most popular thing in the game. Everyone was talking about it all the time, and it's all people really cared about back then. We have accuracy for the leech, for the defense down. This was another personal best of mine using my newly found Martyr, Foli, and Lightsworn, once again with Battle and Longbeard. This is a cool team. It still wasn't at a 1 key yet. Kind of disappointing for me, but I did keep trying and going further. And now, these are what tournament rewards were like 2 years ago. So this is just something to keep in mind here. Definitely ignore the fact that this event just started and I have 12,000 points. Focus more on the right side rewards. Focus more on the first place, second place rewards, and I'll compare it to what you see today. So this was the state back then, and no one really complained because we didn't really know better. We were kind of just happy for getting stuff, for doing events when we did have tournaments up. So I do think it's really cool to kind of see the contrast between what we had back then that we didn't even talk about compared to what we see now, when literally every tournament we're always complaining about it, which is really the reason why I've never been too big into complaining, because I do remember what this game was like way back then. So literally anything they do now is better than when this game first started, hands down. Alright, for this next one, we pulled the Golden Reaper here. Everyone was fascinated with Golden Reaper when she first came out. Really interesting mechanic with that A1 reducing everyone's cooldowns. I remember pulling her and maxing her pretty early, so I had tons of players saying, yo, how does this chick work? Is she good? I did make her pretty fast. I'm almost positive this was the fastest champion on my account at the time. So just consider that for a moment. 242 speed, which now is hilariously slow, but it is what it is. So there's another look at my Battle Khazar, a little bit tankier, pretty quick, accuracy at a finally reasonable level. For the first time, I think, since I had him on this account. Only took me almost 3 months, but it's fine. Now, this is the beginning of my third account. So it's safe to say I have a massive problem with this game, always have. Warlord, Dracomorph, Skullcrown, Tyrell, once again, Tyrell was like my go-to epic, and this is where I really fell in love with Skullcrown. Like, don't even worry about Warlord and Dracomorph based on how good they are today. Back then, Dracomorph really wasn't good. If you're not aware of this, Dracomorph was given a massive buff, making him the best overall champion in the game. From the beginning of global beta, when that launches, to this point in the game, Draco was considered the worst legendary in the game. He had a weak version of defense down on weaken, or something like that, I don't remember specifically. He had the weak version of the poisons. His A1 did no damage. He was just considered trash. I did have a clanmate who used him in a toxic set back then, who did make him work for Nightmare, and he used to flex on people in the general Discord all the time when they said he was bad. But so this was the start of my second account here. I'm 99% sure this was actually right when he got buffed. So I might have been, I don't know, I could be wrong, but of course Warlord's very strong. And it's kind of funny to see this Warlord build here. No banner. This was literally a fresh account. I want to say this picture was taken maybe 2 weeks or 1 week into the account. So obviously I'm leaning more towards 1 week into the account. So clearly chicken packs were bought, lots of shards were bought just to see what I could get early on, and I definitely had a ton of fun. It did seem like a reoccurring theme, as all 3 accounts that I did have at the time had an Ignatius in it. This is my first stage 19 Dragon Slayer run. I actually achieved this within 2 weeks of starting the account. Of course, because I whaled, and at this point I had decent knowledge of the game, nothing crazy or impressive, and I am assuming Dracomorph was recently buffed here, simply based on the fact that I was indeed using him. And here's my first stage 20 run a little bit later that same day. This is the team I used for Clan Boss. As you can see, the name of my account at the time was Player 3, level 48, straight up killing it, 2 key, brutal, which seems like nothing now, but it definitely was a lot, as the second hardest difficulty available in the game at the time there, using Warlord, Elenaro in the Clan Boss. Just think about that for a second. Robar, Dracomorph, and finally Tyrell. Really interesting team for sure. This was my first Skull Crown build here. Champions were a bit leveled up after 1 day. We have another 6-star here, which is nice for Ignatius. Actually, quite a few more 6 stars in just 1 day. Pretty impressive. But here was my first Skull Crown build. Terrible, not crit capped, really low speed. Attack was decent, crit damage horrendous. So this is what we were working with at the time. Here's another significantly faster stage 20 run where I did add Gorgorob in there, so that was a good time. Moving on to Brutal on this account now, 14 minutes, 19 million damage. Kind of the breakdown of all the champions we have going on here. I'm not sure if I manualed this. I'm assuming I did, since it did take 14 minutes. It would make more sense that I did, in fact, manual. And then for some reason we have a key that did significantly better at 28 million damage. And okay, so 3 days went by. I'm assuming I farmed a lot more gear, so that's why the damage did go up. Once again, an even faster stage 20 dragon run at 2 minutes 17 seconds with my best there. Then we pulled Zavia. Poison Explosion was pretty hype back then, so the fact that I had Elenaro and Zavia along with champions like Dracomorph was really a good time. Here's another stage 20 run. We got it down to 1 minute and 48 seconds, which was very quick back then, especially for a new account. Once again, 3% short of crit cap. No bad L on this account, no excuse. Not sure what I was thinking. This is just cringe to see. Okay, once again, if you're watching, don't ever do this. Learn from my mistakes, please. Moving on to my Cold Heart. Okay, Cold Heart, we're ramping now. She's extremely slow. She probably wouldn't get a turn in any content. Reasonable accuracy, so I did learn about the accuracy there. Like I said, enough crit for the Heartseeker, not too shabby, decent amount of crit damage there. So overall, things are going pretty well, and once again, I did end up pulling a Skull Crusher on this account. I'd gotten really lucky with shards before, and everyone always speculated I had insane RNG on all of my accounts because I kept pulling Skull Crushers. So another even faster stage 20 run with a few surprise people in it. We have Robar here, we have Skull Crown. You didn't typically see them. Zavia being the real carry here overall, significantly reducing my time to 1 minute and 37 seconds. Now we have Spider. Now, tell me how interesting of a team this is here. We have Warlord, Royal Guard, Cold Heart, Dracomorph. Everyone's dead here but Zavia. It got me straight to stage 19 Spider, which is one of the huge walls of the game. Of course, stage 20 wasn't going to work because it was green and it was a nightmare. So moving on to the next picture now, 3 days later. Much more wailing. As we can see, my legendary roster has grown significantly here. Nothing too crazy. Warlord and Lifesteal is something you'll probably never see again outside of this picture unless you're using him in early game Clan Boss, so good times back then. I'm pretty sure this was Nightmare since it's not hovered right now. And me 3-keying with some of my clan mates with their accounts that they've had for many months, which once again just goes to show on how much of a problem I did have way back then with spending for sure. So this is when Ultra Nightmare came out. Now, people might not know this, but one of my clanmates was the first person to make Unkillable teams. He did this using 2 rush card the towers, and it seems so stupid when thinking back to it now. We were all practicing these keys, and you're going to see in some of the next screens people doing 6 keys to get the top chest of 70 million, which everyone complained was insanely broken because of the incredible jump in difficulty. His name was Najdu, and we were like, man, how the hell did you just do over 60 million damage with 1 key? He goes, I used 2 block damage champions and made sure the buff was up 100% of the time. And it was the most mind-blowing statement of 2019 for all of Raid Shadow Legends. Like literally, that's how it began. Just with one statement like that, and 1 key attempted from this guy. So in case you were curious, as we can see from the time here, I did manual this, of course, using Elenaro, who was a poison explosion, and even Arbiter made into my first version of the Unkillable team that I did make based off of what I saw Najdu doing with 2 rush guard the towers and I think 3 poisoners. So it was pretty interesting back then. Everything was really open. People were making teams left and right to figure out what was good. This was my Arbiter build back then, and I honestly have zero idea what I was thinking with accuracy. I'm assuming I wanted her for a weekend. Let me just go back to that picture. Yes, so I have no weekend in this team at all. I actually have no defense down in this team at all, which is a little bit embarrassing, but I'm assuming I used Arbiter for the weekend here. We had no idea how much accuracy we needed for Ultra Nightmare when it came out, so I'm assuming this is the reason why. This is probably the worst Arbiter build I've ever seen in my life, and it's from me, so a huge humbling moment there for sure. Moving on to Sir Nicholas. Interesting to see what a manual team looked like with the speeds here. So 234 speed there, not bad, not bad. Not crit cap, so I was missing out on a lot of damage there. Elenaro, pretty straightforward. Pretty quick, high accuracy for that Ultra Nightmare team. Steel Skull, same thing. Using a Steel Skull in a Toxic set to cap the debuffs. Now that's something you'll probably never see again. And finally, Rush Guard the Tower. 236 speed. Not even crit capped once again. I don't know what I was thinking back then. Maybe just the gear. But here we have it. 2 keys, 100 million damage on one of the first days. Actually, I don't know how many days into Ultra Nightmare this was. But just take a look at this. These are how many keys it was taking everybody to hit that max chest when this first came out. Now, why was it important for this to happen? We had 7 hours left of the clan boss, and clan boss was not unkillable back then. As soon as you hit 0 HP, your key ended, the clan boss died, and not a single player could hit it again. I would stay like this for a very, very long time. So let's all be so thankful that once it hits 0, we can still perform and go through these keys. Because you think clan quests are bad with people competing? Imagine competing for the most important source of free resources in the game, being clan boss. Imagine having to coordinate, not overhitting. If one person did too much damage, then a whole player couldn't get the rewards for that day. So that's how bad it was back then, and it took way too long for them to figure that out. The first Savage build I had, okay, here we have 100% crit rate, can't complain about that. And so one thing I actually didn't comment on, so this is the first account with Sir Nicholas and Tower that I left, made the other 2 accounts, then I came back to this original one here. So that is something I forgot, that I did come back to it for Ultra Nightmare after seeing Najdu with his Unkillable. This is the account that I had the 2 Unkillable champions on, so this is when I made the kind of hard swap back as far as maining an account back to this one. Sacred Order Crypt, and I'm sure many of you know the Faction War Crypts were nerfed many times, so these were extremely difficult to complete. As we can see, 13 minutes using 3 of the best legendaries in the game. But just to kind of let you gauge on the difficulty of things like this. Here's another 1 key Ultra Nightmare, having to manual, as we can see, from 46 minutes, with Martyr now into the mix here, providing me with the defense down, skyrocketing my damage for sure. Another 73 million attempt there. Okay, this one's a little bit more respectable, except still not 100% crit rate. You hate to see it, you really do. This was my progress in the Great Hall on my main account in September of 2019. Nothing too impressive. 17 arena losses, you hate to see it. This was my, I guess, first real damage Skull Crown build. Once again, not crit capped. I wish I had someone like myself screaming down my throat every time to crit cap every single champion, or you're unintelligent. I wish. Molly tankered. This was around the fusion. I ended up pulling her. Things like this typically happened. I was just unlucky that way. 94 million. There's that 94 million compared to the progression of the rest of the clan. Some people moved on from 6 keying, as we can see a 4 key there with a very famous Turvold team using Bad Owl, Apothecary, Turvold, Arbiter, as well as Martyr there. That was a very famous team back in the day. This is my roster once again, ever expanding slowly this time. Looks like I wasn't spending too much money on the main account. I might have been playing the other accounts a bit more. A very common arena team at the time was Rashkar the Tower because of his base speed being so impressive. Arbiter went first, Rashkar blocked your team, you did damage, their Skull Crowns had no chance of dealing damage to you because you had block damage and it was just a great time overall. Now let's talk about Angar here. Angar is a champion that I pulled. I loved the way he looked and I did everything in my power to make him work. I thought he was such a cool champion. People said he was terrible, I said I don't care, he looks cool, and as we all know to this day, all I care about is champions looking cool. I had insane crit damage on him. Speed wasn't that impressive, but he did so much damage, it was a lot of fun to use. Here's my first Razin Scarhide build. I went full resistance to take advantage of that aura there. He was crit capped, so I was slowly learning back then. Moving on to some more arena memes here. Seeker Angar, one of my go-to teams that I thoroughly enjoyed playing with. 22-second win on a Ghost second team, which was not easy to do at the time. Once again, using this team against Hegemon, who recently came out that trivialized and arguably broke the game at the time, fighting SK Nova. It's really cool seeing all these old names. Maybe some of you old-time players will recognize these names as well. Now here's something that led up to the only arena team that I ever made here. Razin, Angar, and 2 Skull Crowns. Now, this isn't the team that I came up with, but it's slowly coming up once another fusion, a certain fusion we're going to see in a few moments, come by. It's the only arena team that I personally made myself, and it was the most fun I've ever had in this game, as well as anyone else who decided to use it. This was a very old stream layout of mine, and if you've been playing for a really long time, you will recognize the name on the bottom. Shout out to Miss Ali. He's a guy who kind of just vanished overnight, and it's really humbling seeing an old picture like this of when I literally first started streaming. Here we had a troll defense going on with a level 1 Bellower. Here's my best build, 99% crit rate. A little bit short there, bud. I guess I didn't realize it at the time. This is when Gala Longbraid came out and I was trying to show everyone, look at her damage at level 59 without full masteries compared to Fushan, who is considered a busted damage dealer, still to this day insane damage dealer. So here's Gala's build. We did crit cap her. We have her in Savage gear. She's actually looking pretty strong here, and she was doing a stupid amount of damage back then compared to all the other champions. This is when I thought it was a good idea to use someone like Ignatius as a nuker, along with Skull Crown as a support champion. So this was definitely a great time to be alive for Raid Shadow Legends. Honestly, this game was so much fun back then, it's really hard to kind of tell you guys through a video on the glory days. Not to say that the game's completely terrible right now, but this game was absolutely incredible when it first came out. So it looks like after a couple of months I actually started getting speed on some pieces. I no longer had to use Arbiter for the clan boss, it looks like, so he put all the speed onto her. Finally got over 300 speed, so that's definitely a huge milestone to hit in 2019, just before the turn of the year there. Skull Crown starting to formulate what became kind of my signature arena team going forward. Here's a second one that really started to formulate. If you guys noticed already, it's the Resistance here. And here's my Great Hall, 171, just before the new year. This is when I had to use Seer as a weekend champion. These were very good times. This is a really unique picture here because this is no longer in the game. Think about the pack. Just open up Raid really quick when you have time. Look at the pack that you have. Look at your daily Conqueror pack. This is what we had every single day back then. A $5 brilliant pack. I don't want to say a whale because definitely not just whales, but if you spent money on this game, this was one of the most common packs that everybody bought. The most common. For $5, getting that clan boss key with Ultra Nightmare being still fairly new. Some people, it took them 4 keys, 5 keys for months and months at a time. This was a really common thing to buy, $5 a day for sure. Now moving on to Shamrock. This was a Funnel Seer build. I decided to stop using her for weaken and use her for pure damage here. This was a ton of fun to do. Some more Seer shenanigans. I was now in Gods and Legends at the time. That was definitely a great time in my raid career for sure. I had so much fun in Gods and Legends. And now Brakus came out, the only, to this day, whale only fusion. Plarium specifically stated publicly in a news in-game article that this champion was for people who were planning to spend money to fuse this guy because they made it very difficult. And this champion, as mentioned before, led me to make the only signature arena team I ever had, and I think it's coming up shortly. This is me using Brakus in an Ultra Nightmare team, doing among the most damage that people were doing at the time, while people were still downplaying how good Brakus was because they didn't realize it at the time. And this was the signature team that I made for arena. Full resistance, go second team. I was tired of the speed meta. I thought it was kind of dull, and this team, as we're going to see in a few screenshots, teams were just killing themselves. They would do damage to my champions, I would counterattack, they would kill Brakus, Brakus would one-shot somebody. They couldn't debuff my team because I had ridiculous resistance at the time, with Razin Leader, with lifesteal resistance and damage on the Skull Crown. This was such a good time in arena. Things were pretty poppin'. I wasn't crit capped here, that's a little disappointing, but this resistance was indeed high enough at the time to prevent 99% of debuffs outside of that 3% chance for them to cut in each time. Here's some more progress on that Unkillable that we're talking about. Pretty close to 100 million damage, which was insane at the time. This is me using Yannicka before she was buffed. This is around the time where I was getting ready to start YouTube here, and honestly, surprisingly, Yannicka was actually one of the reasons people were talking about how bad she was when she was doing incredible damage for me as a player. So that was like, I need some outlet to let people know how good this champion is. Fire Knight's Castle using Yannicka when people were saying she's terrible and had no use in the game. Pretty decent time as well. This is when I pulled a Hegemon. Harvest Jack came out, really great combo. I'll never forget Beast Snake. Beast Snake was definitely a top player at the time. I definitely remember that name. And this is something that I don't get the opportunity to do anymore because of the test server. However, if you've been watching me for a long time, you know that I always made it my business to instantly fuse every champion. So what's interesting to note here, December 13th, 12 minutes prior to this screenshot, the Tormin fusion became available. So what I would do is I would figure out who you needed. I would save tons of shards or buy tons of shards and just summon everything, making sure I summoned every single champion needed to fuse the champion instantly. I would test them out, make a guide on it, put it out there, and I actually used Tormin for about 2 weeks and then never used him again. I pretty much figured out what he counters and who counters him, and as soon as I figured out who counters Tormin, I never used him again and just started bullying every other team I could think of in this game because they were all just getting Tormin for the first time, since it had been a decent amount of time for any realistic player who wasn't going crazy spending money to in fact fuse Tormin. And so that was kind of a cheeky thing I used to do. So this is where I got Trunda. As we can see, I've had Trunda for quite a long time. December 2019, Trunda and Seer. This was my Trunda build back then. This is one of the more surprising builds from December 2019. Granted, it's not Savage. There is 2 sets of cool gear, 100% crit rate. We have 290% crit damage, even though the attack was extremely low in this champion. But it's kind of interesting. This is probably the best build I did have back then of all the champions that I just showed you, because the speed is also reasonable here. So Trunda was a lot of fun. Completely broken. We all knew it as soon as she came out, and this is pretty interesting. I don't know if anyone remembers Ontrax. We've been playing for a long time. He was one of the biggest whales in this game that quit, and also, as we can see in the right here, humble beginnings, 21 viewers when I first started out, and another notorious content creator, Scratch AK47, was among the first subscribers when I first started out, so a huge shout out to Scratch, appreciate him. Moving on to the next screenshot, Harvest Jack came out, awesome fusion. I built him pure damage first to start, just to see how hard he hit. Ended up hitting pretty hard, and I did enjoy this champion a ton while playing him. This is the Yule tree. Now, prior to the Yule tree being in that spot, the legendary campfire was there, that nobody knew what the hell was going on. They kept saying, we have a surprise for the campfire. We're going to make some type of interaction here. The Yule tree appeared. We figured that eventually we'd be able to click on it, collect some rewards. Spoiler, that never happened. The Yule tree just appeared there, grayed out like that, like eventually it would be activated, and it never did. This is what the basic UI looked like back then. Summon events, when they were active, they didn't have any glowing effect there. Quality of everything was definitely much lower back then than it is now. They definitely did tons of work making everything look more realistic. On the home screen here, but the biggest thing, like I said, was the Yule tree and the campfire that we wondered for over a year, if not almost, no, not 2 years, but probably a year and a half, saying, what are we going to do with the middle of the bastion here? because everyone wanted to know. It's been there forever, and it was one of the biggest questions in Raid at the time. Moving on to 2020, pretty much the end of my early game journey, 193 Platinum Arena was out. This is what my roster ended up becoming. No self-control from me whatsoever. Buying every single pack I could, filling up to get every single legendary I could, and it was insane. Platinum came out. I'm not sure if many people know this, and huge shout out to Fiesta, one of my current clan members. But anyways, back to what I was saying. When Platinum first came out, there was no real reset, there were no real rewards. It was just, you saw where you finished, and it was kind of cool to finish at the top each week. That's it. You didn't get Swift Parry. So this was the long part of Platinum where that caused a lot of the top arena players in the game to stop playing because there were no trophies, there were no unique avatars. This was quite some time ago, over a year ago at this point when Platinum first came out, and people really wanted a reason to stay up to whatever time it was for their time zone, but they just couldn't fathom it because you really got nothing out of it. So that was the interesting Platinum take there. Lugan the Steadfast, he was a fun champion to build. This is when I first realized Lugan was the best healer in the game. As you can see here, 3.7 million damage being healed in Nightmare Clan Boss. Whirlum Frost King came in with the Battle Pass, got him instantly, 6-starred him instantly, and put him for some reason in immunity gear. I'm sure I had a great reason. With almost 400 accuracy, there was definitely no good reason for that. This is me once again going on a spree, pulling a second Trunda at the time, pulling Cupidus, Fushan, Arrow, War Mother, another Arrow, Alton, Lonicus, and Mountain King. So this just goes to show you my spending habits at the time and spending patterns. This is when the Rotos fusion came out. Those were good times for sure. This is when a lot of content creators said don't fuse Rotos, Sepulchre Sentinel's really good. And this is pretty much when I started my YouTube career and really started becoming big as a YouTuber, when I was saying, guys, I'm not sure if you tested the same champion I did. When they didn't, they just read the kit and said don't fuse him. But this guy was busted, and look at how strong Rotos the Lost Groom is today. So I had tons of fun testing this guy out, and people quickly realized, thankfully, after me putting out that video, how good Rotos was, and the opinion quickly changed there. Here's when I got my first Duchess, built her up, decent resist really quick, and of course Sifu was out at the time. These were my humble beginnings, like I said, in YouTube. Really brings you back 1,000 views, 3,000 views, 8,000 views in the Rotos video, like I was just explaining. So this was really cool to kind of reflect on and reminisce about for sure. Now, the last thing I want to talk about in this story of the early parts of Raid Shadow Legends is this person right here, Friday. Now, for those of you who don't know and weren't playing at the time, Friday no longer plays. I tried for a long time to see if he still played. Pretty much around when this screenshot was taken, this was the last I kind of heard from him. This is the inventor of the Blender team. This guy coined the Blender team, and he's, to this day, I'm probably his biggest fanboy. To this day, he's probably the best arena player I've ever seen in this game. A lot of speed tuning strategies he was coming out with before there was any sort of calculator. He was notorious for having the hardest hitting Skull Crown at the time. He had the most unbelievable 3-man offense that consisted of Arbiter, Shiramani, and a damage dealing Harvest Jack. So definitely wanted to end the video on this point because of how much Friday impacted this game by introducing Blender and so many other cool arena tactics to this game. Alright guys, thanks a bunch for watching. I know this was a very long video, but this is something I've wanted to do for such a long time. I thought it was really important to show you guys kind of what the game was like back then. And since I did kind of catalog all of this as I did progress through my accounts, I did want to show you what it was like for me back then when I was starting. If you are starting now, so you can kind of get a gauge on what it is like to progress through this game. The longer you play, the more you learn, the more you can learn from other people, and in the end you realize you don't need tons of skill for this game. It all comes down to knowledge. If you've been playing this game for a long time, you're going to consider most things in this game easy, regardless of the champions you guys have. As always guys, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe, like, turn on the notification bell, and I will see you all in the next upload.